So it's wonderful. We can edit other people's scripts. That's a very important part of programming. But we also want to be able to create our own script. And what we're going to have is a sound play every time I run into a wall. We'll do that in scene 2. I just want to clean up a couple little things in scene 1 before we go there. First of all, warehouse has a lowercase w, and I like to be very consistent in the way I name things. So I'll put a capital W there. That consistency is really important when you start programming so that you know without having to constantly look back in your hierarchy how you're naming things. I also keep names simple, so if I only have one windmill, I don't really need to describe it with medieval windmill. I'll click once, click again to rename it, and I just want that to say windmill. And then this one down here called nature, it's not even clear what that is. I'm going to call it nature sound, and yes, I will use a capital N. I could also start cleaning up my project window. If I go to my assets and go into audio, I've got 3 audio files there. As projects get larger and larger, you're going to have a lot of audio files. So you may want a folder for each of your characters, and then you can have audio in there. You could have a folder for your ambiance and have different files in there, a folder for music, a folder for sound effects. So really organizing this in the long term will save you time if it's a very big game. Okay, let's go back into scene 2. Save this one. We have the choice of adding a script to play the audio for a thud sound either on the walls or on the player character. I think I'm going to try to put it on the player character, so I'm going to use the FPS controller. We already have one script attached to this game object, but that's okay if we add another script, or we could modify this script for our own purposes. I typically like to leave the scripts alone if I don't have to modify them too much and create my own. So I'm going to actually collapse the first person controller script. Zoom into that FPS controller. If I collapse the character controller component, I don't see the collider of my character controller anymore. So somehow that collider is attached to this object or part of this object. Possibly the character controller extends from collider, which relates to inheritance, which is a more advanced topic. But I'll leave that open so I can see the collider. And this toggle object on key press is one that we created for our flashlight. I'll collapse that, and I'll collapse rigid body. So now we have plenty of space over here in the inspector to work. I'm going to add a component, a new script. I'll call this collision behavior. Create an add. So now I have another script attached to my FPS controller. If I go into my assets folder, I see that script there. I'm going to drag it into the scripts folder to keep it organized. And I can see it right there. I can edit that script by hitting the gearbox and choosing edit script, or I can just double click it in the project window. And there we go. Our class collision behavior is here with 2 methods inside of it, the start method and the update method. I don't think we're going to need the update method. I'm going to delete that one. And we know what a start method is, so I don't need the comment. We'll test this out real quick. I'll save this and run it to make sure our message is being printed to the console. And yes, it says yay in our console. We're going to add a function named onCollisionEnter. This is very similar to onTriggerEnter. Remember, our door had a collider, which we had set to be a trigger, and so we could use the method onTriggerEnter. We don't want to do that here because if a collider is a trigger, then you can still run right through it. And we don't want to be able to run right through our walls. So if it's not a trigger, we can't use onTriggerEnter. What can we use? We can use this method, onCollisionEnter. That works for colliders which are not triggers. With onTriggerEnter, we could pass an argument that's of type collider. With onCollisionEnter, we can pass an argument that's of type collision. And you could name this whatever you'd like. I'll just keep it simple. Normally that would not be a very good variable. It's not very descriptive. However, this variable is only going to exist for this one method, so I don't think I'll confuse it with other things. Let's put a debug.log in. So theoretically, anytime my player character collides with any object, I should get a little message. Let's save this and run it. I've already collided with the floor and didn't get any message. If I run over to the wall, still no message. So I'm going to press escape and stop. So this is absolutely the normal way you would check to see if two non-trigger colliders are colliding and then do something. And I wanted to show you that. But the FPS controller object, if I come over here, doesn't actually have a collider attached to it. We do know there is a collider, but that collider is generated in some other way, related to the character controller. So I couldn't use the normal method of onCollisionEnter. Instead, I actually Googled onCollisionEnter for FPS controller. And I quickly learned that there's a different method that I should be using for this. Instead of onCollisionEnter, we'll use onControllerColliderHit. And instead of passing a collision object to this method, we will pass a ControllerColliderHit object. And again, I can name this anything I want. I'll just name it hit. Okay, let's save it and see if this works now. Wonderful, the collision is happening constantly. You see the number going up of all the times I'm colliding with the floor. If I jump, that number stops for a moment because I'm not colliding with anything. If I run over to a wall and jump, I still see I'm colliding because I'm still hitting the wall. I'll press escape. Go back to the code. We don't want the sound to play every single time I hit the floor. I only want it to play when I hit a wall. Instead of printing out collision here, let's see if we can print out the thing I'm colliding with. We can do that with hit, and a controller collider hit object has methods and properties. You can look them up in the API, but one of them is the collider, which is the collider that was hit. And then from that collider, I can say .gameObject, which is the game object that that collider belongs to. And then I can say .name, which is the name of that game object. I'm going to save this and run it. And now you can see it says floor, 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 floor. If I jump, it pauses for a moment. If I run over to a wall, I can see I'm hitting the wall and the floor back and forth. It's actually wall 2 that I'm hitting there. Let's escape and stop. If I open up my room game object and see my walls, there is a wall 2 there. So that is the wall that I was hitting.